Wanted to talk pretty much about why this project started and what happened and how it grew and became what it is today. So this project is called Kyulpo because Kyulpo is a term that I actually was called when I was growing up. It's a Korean term that defines an individual of Korean ancestry that lives outside of the peninsula. And it is a photographic and textual project that talks about identity and immigration through the lens of the Korean diaspora. So this was a project I wanted to do because I didn't see anything in bookstores that represented the Korean culture and contemporary art and contemporary issues. And this was back in 2003, 2004. And I decided to kind of fill this gap, and I thought there was a need, and I started the project in November of 2004. And there's another reason why I started the project too, is also to understand how individuals who share the same ancestry had contextualized themselves in their environments, what types of decision-making they've done, what types of lives they've led, what types of challenges or successes they've been able to experience. And that was another major reason for doing this project. So the first individual that was part of this project was pretty much an accident. It was an individual, Sebastian Sun, who's an MIT professor of neurological and cognitive sciences. He was standing in line at the Cooper Hewitt, and he had approached me to ask about the exhibition, and I in turn asked him if he was Korean American and what he thought about being Korean and American. And he actually didn't know what to say because he's never thought about it before. And so he ended up coming over to my studio, and we had photographed him and had him answer a set of questions. And from there, he recommended a few people, they recommended others, and the group snowballed into 240 individuals. So the grouping was quite organic. It wasn't something that was researched, or these individuals were not sought out. And that's what made it kind of unique, was the fact that this was a sampling of individuals that you were meeting for the first time, that you didn't read about, that you bumped into, a sampling that was able to give such surprising society-based topics, individual stories, moving, heartfelt, funny, etc. And a lot of these topics represent the current issues that a lot of countries are embodied in the modernized culture. So the process of this typological series was basically they were to stand in a very comfortable fashion with their hands exposed, and there was also just a relaxation in the face, no smiling, and that was basically done to be able to compare and contrast the imagery, so that the individual can see the differences or similarities from person to person. I definitely wanted to emphasize that this is not photographed by scale. There was a falsification of scale, and that was done intentionally to be able to create this uniformity and to also allow the voices of the individuals, especially for the portraits, to resonate along the same lines and not have other people overshadowed based on their scale. So basically what was also interesting with some of the processes of creating the individual portrait was the intentional abstraction of the background, which pushed the portraiture, or the individual, closer to the viewer, allowing more of an intimate experience. And also the groundwork, the ground that they were standing on was very important too, because I didn't want them floating in space. I wanted to have them grounded. It also served as a unifying element to the process and to the collective portrait as well. So the individuals were not told what to wear. They came as they wanted to be represented. It was quite interesting to see how some of the participants really made a concerted effort to create an image to present themselves, and how others just came in like flip-flops and torn jeans. And I think what was interesting also was the diverse array of looks, different seasons represented throughout the years, and also everything from informal to highly formal attire. So essentially, with some of the stances, I thought was intriguing. The stances with some individuals, to me, represented the culture that they resonated. And I don't know if you ever think about this when you look at a portrait and you see how they stand, if you can kind of tell where they're from. But it is an intriguing challenge, and I found Samuel Hamier, a French individual who was adopted of Korean ancestry, to stand in a very distinct way that, to me, resembled the French culture. So basically, from this whole process, which was a 6-year production process, there were so many different issues that surfaced that I couldn't even imagine. And it was incredibly nourishing, and it was an incredible honor to hear their stories and to be able to record them. And some of these issues or subject matters revolved around heroism or humanity. And people that illustrated this were Patricia Han and Sarah Choi. And Patricia Han is a woman who had lost her husband in the 9/11 attacks, and instead of actually being really upset about it and not being productive, she realized that this was a reminder of how important it is for us to be able to help others that don't have as much as she has, and how we all have a purpose to be able to affect our communities and affect people that do need help. And in response to that, she started an orphanage in Bangladesh because she felt that Bangladesh children needed help to become individuals, functioning individuals in their societies. I thought that was pretty outstanding. Another subject, as you probably are familiar with from the downstairs exhibition, was the mixed blood factor, the Hapas. And that was fascinating to me because these individuals had a slightly different experience from what I was used to hearing. And Michelle Lee Svensson is one of those individuals, and she says, as a Hapa, half Korean and half Scandinavian, many think that I'm Native American. When Native people ask me what tribe I'm from, I answer from the Korean Scandinavian tribe of Oklahoma. In the 1980s, in a little town called Delray City, my family had a restaurant called Bamboo Garden. It was actually a Korean restaurant disguised as a Chinese restaurant. We even brought in a chef from China and had fortune cookies. And that's also an indication of the knowledge of different Asian cultures back then in her area. Another subject matter that came up was adoption, which was fascinating to me because I really didn't know a lot of individuals who were adopted that were Asian, growing up in white households. And that brought on so many different types of stories, and one included Linda Choi Vestergaard, who is a Danish architect who, at 6 months old, together with her identical triplet sisters, were adopted by the last remaining Danish farmers in Chile. And she had no exposure to the Korean ancestry growing up, so her first exposure was when she had an internship, a 6 months internship in New York City, and she was able to meet the first person who was Korean and not adopted for the first time in her life in her late 20s. So this was a new experience for her, and in meeting me, I was like the second person she met. So it was fascinating to me how she was so removed from her ancestral culture, and there was an inquiry among the sisters to learn more about it, but they were kind of afraid to find out why they were adopted, what the story was. And so they kind of let it lie and settle. But when Linda was able to engross herself in the culture in New York City, she actually persuaded her sisters to reach out and try to find her biological parents. So she did find the parents, and the parents sent a beautiful letter in Korean and sent it over to me and said, "Can you translate this?" And I said, "Well, not very well, but I'll find somebody that can." And it started with My Little Star 1, Little Star 2, Little Star 3. And it turned out that these girls were adopted because they couldn't afford the medical bills or were preemies. And they ended up having a family reunion with their real set of Danish parents together. And it was, she said, one of the most memorable moments in her life. Another topic that surfaced was cultural confusion. You know, having such influences from different cultures that affect your behaviors in different scenarios definitely come out. And one happened to be with Ashley Lee, who's an Apache helicopter, U.S. Apache helicopter pilot, and she is in the U.S. Army. Her rank is captain. And she says, during my first tour in Korea as a first lieutenant, it took some time for some South Korean soldiers attached to my unit to understand my rank and affiliation with the U.S. Army. After they walked past me without rendering the proper salute, I spoke to them in Korean to clarify my rank and status as an American officer. It was clear that my hair in a bun female, my face very Korean, and the U.S. Army stitched onto my uniform, not Korean, was a bit much for them to process. And so when they did, they started walking backwards, and they apologized profusely while saluting and bowing at the same time. So these are some of these different types of cultural confusions that people experienced. Another thing that surfaced was the sense of internationalism, this transnationalism, this bombardment of so many other cultures besides the Korean culture and the American culture. And because of that, you know, we were able to profile people that are of Korean ancestry that grew up and have citizenships in Denmark, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, people that grew up in Hong Kong and the Philippines, or in the Canary Islands, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia. And that was quite fascinating to me because I wasn't used to meeting individuals who were Korean that spoke with a Spanish accent and, you know, loved his red wine and his tapas. So it was very interesting because I could see his Korean makeup, his DNA, but his mannerisms, the way he spoke, everything was very Spanish. Yeah, so Park, who is the individual who's Spanish, raised from the Canary Islands, he says, if Spain is the seafood, the pungent garlic, and the spices, America is the meat, the hearty vegetables, and the herbs. For many years, I've tried to make a decent Korean casserole with the above ingredients, but always had trouble with how much doenjang to use, this particular sauce. Beijing, being kyoko to me is the ability to mix one's ingredients in the right amounts, with special attention to the Korean lens. My identity is based on equal parts Spanish passion, American ambition, and a Korean sense of duty. And more stories can be found in the Kyoko book that's been published in 2011. I believe they have copies of it here as well. So what was interesting is, as when we look back and outside of the textual aspect and look more into the portraiture aspect, this project also was a nice study of individual portraiture versus collective portraiture. And with the individual portraiture, the individual takes more precedence than the actual framing or composition. And you can see that when you experience it down the hall. But then when you look at the collective, you see that the actual framing and the composition takes more precedence than the individual. And it becomes this other type of experience. And that was an intentional forced grouping because it made me think about collective group pictures and portraits and how that has been exercised in the past. In painting, in the medium of painting and drawing and so forth, and what that means and how we use it as a way of recording history. And not only with just painting and mediums, but with basic photography, with non-art related photography that's captured in team portraits, military portraits, you know, school portraits, all of that. And so it was a nice study of understanding how the individual alone and the individual together can sometimes change that experience or that identity experience. What's also fascinating too is the philosophical nature of the singular and the collective. The individual mindset versus the collective mindset. And with the singular individual mindset, we're used to experiencing and exercising a lot of that, being Americans, living in America. And it's revered and it's admired, and it also is an impetus for innovation. With the collective mindset, we also understand in America that can be translated into teamwork. And in Asia, it goes way beyond mainly Confucianistic philosophies. And with that, you know, you have this kind of understanding of different decision making based on the individual and collective mindset. And it allows us to think about how we juggle these particular philosophies and how they are implemented or not implemented in our own everyday decision making. So yeah, overall, the project was also, it involved a lot of social interaction. One, because there were people that were profiles and participants, and the other was because I wanted to get this book published. And so, for example, with Julian Stalabras, who had written, he's an art critic in London, and had written the introduction to the book, he saw also parts of this project as the social practice of art, meaning the gathering and collecting of people that have the same ancestry, and the participatory aspect of doing fundraisers in both New York City and California, and having people think about, this particular concept and align with it, and why do they align with it. And that in itself has been quite interesting too, is how he and some other critics have been able to see it as a social interactive project as well. And I think overall, what has surfaced is something that was beyond my imagination. It was not something that I wanted to create a message. It was something that I wanted to see. I wanted to create the structure to see what would fall into this platform. And I think also basing this in New York City was also key to the overall results of the project. Perhaps if I based it in another area that wasn't a city, or a well-traversed city, or a well-known city, maybe we would see different types of data, or different types of responses or issues that would come to fruition. So that was something to look at. And that's pretty much the crux of the Kirkle project. So I think what I want to do is go further into, because there's been some requests, is to talk about some of my other projects, projects that I've done and that are mainly based, that I've done mainly based in China. And so we're going to go on to the next slide package to discuss. But before we go to that, I think I'm going to also mention one other component to Kirkle, which I thought was a nice challenge, and this has to do with Kirkle multiplicity. Kirkle multiplicity was something that was created due to an opportunity given to me by the Associate Director of the National Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian, Apostolides. He has this venue that was a beautiful venue that was designed by Norman Foster that houses up to 2,000 people. And this is one little shot of it. So he said, I want to do something with this project. I really resonate with this project, and it would be great to be able to utilize this space. So at the same time, I was meeting different individuals in different art fields for various reasons, other projects, etc. And what was created was Kirkle Multiplicity, which is a collaboration between Benoit Grenier, who's a French composer who created a 10-movement piece with also American composer Emily Derides, and a collaboration with well-known contemporary dance choreographer Dana Tyson-Burgess, who's very well-known in the DC area. He also is the chair of theater at Georgetown University. So we decided to be able to translate this project into a performance event where we could take the core crux and the meaning behind this project and put it through music, through dance, and through imagery. And with that, the imagery was projected onto the walls, both sides of the walls. You can only see one side. And there were different speeds at different intervals that represented, that complemented the different movements in the actual musical piece. And it was quite enjoyable because I was able to learn about musical structure with the composer. We were able to talk and collaborate on a very detailed basis. And so dance was also integrated in the middle of the space. And again, we're looking at a space that's not meant to be a theater, with a traditional theater with seats and a stage. And so it allowed me to think about how could we render this space to become a stage in its own self without any type of seating. So the people were actually surrounded by the central part of where the dancing, most of the dancing occurred. And they had the choice to be able to look at different angles and different walls to be able to take in different components of the piece. So they became part of the piece. And it was a nice exercise in understanding how art can be contextualized in so many different spaces that are non-traditional to performance. On the side wall, we had imagery of select words that were projected. And we also had different instruments that were reflected in the movements, both Asian and both Western. We had the transverse flute, we had the ditsa, we had the kaigun, the Korean kaigun, Japanese drumming. It was quite an endeavor, and we were very happy with how it turned out. This is actually one slide from a project that I did in 2010 in Beijing called Substructure. And it basically profiles 50 migrants from various provinces that reside in Beijing. These migrants are from varied ages, from child to 7 years old to 18 years old. And they were able to tell their stories as to why they moved from one place to the other and talk about China and how they saw the future of China. One of the reasons why I did this project was because I've never experienced living in a place where there were so many migrants. And these migrants actually were Chinese citizens, so they were internal migrants. So what was fascinating is in 2010 when this was made, the internal migration population was estimated to be up to 120 million. And in 2012, only 2 years later, that population has increased to 240 million. So this is definitely something that will continue to be an issue, and with that, hopefully there will be some types of resolutions to be able to help these individuals receive basic benefits like healthcare and education and housing. They essentially live in the shantytowns in the outskirts of Beijing or in car parks or wherever they can find a shelter. And yes, there is a very modernized China in the first, second, and third tier cities, and there's a lot of attention to that as well. But I also wanted to give attention to individuals that are also helping these cities become modernized. They're the hands that serve your food and that build your buildings and help with a lot of service-related jobs. So these individuals were shot with their hands only because they are considered illegal, but they all are also looked at with a blind eye. They're not bothered, but to keep them, to make sure that there were no problems to the subject matter, I numbered them and just photographed their hands. Not only did I photograph their hands, but I married it with a raw footage of their video to capture the kinesthetic gestures. And these are just going through some of the layouts. And this is an example of some of the raw footage of number 20. And it just allowed for the individual to be able to take in more personality from these particular hand movements. And this is just a compilation of the incidents. This was actually first exhibited in 798 on the day of the International Migrants Day. This project was done in collaboration with a NGO called Compassion for Migrant Children, and these individuals were shot in various spaces in their community centers where we pulled out people from the streets and the communities and brought them in to a private room. This was a wonderful layout of the exhibition. Just a simulator of the blue angle. Again, it was translated in the art atrium of LSE in London, a 20-meter wall. So a lot of this work can be translated into different spaces, depending on the space available and the budget. We made some books, a limited print run, and working on publishing for that. Substructure was also translated in just video format only in Dashalar during Beijing Design Week in 2012. So we're able to project these stories in just the hands and color on footage in kind of the contextual space of the subject matter, which to me was intriguing. And that was one reason why I did it, was because Dashalar's population, the majority of its population is migrants, in fact. And so to be able to place subject matter in the context of the subject matter. I thought was quite fascinating. And I originally wanted to project a very large onto a wall on the street and have the people and the migrants pass it by and, you know, discover it and react to it and kind of engage and get their opinions about it. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that. So we had to find a smaller, more public room, but maybe someday. This is just the book. Blue Sky Day is another project that is ongoing based on how long I'll be in Beijing. And it started in 2010 as well, September 2010. And it was something that also was quite different experience-wise for me, and it was something that I knew I had to document. And that was the air quality and the coloration of the sky was very, very different from what I was used to seeing growing up in the States. So what I did was I actually recorded the color patterns of the sky in reference to the API readings, and these are some examples. But the API readings taken were from the Chinese Ministry of Environmental Protection, and at that time they had the 10 particle matter and recording, which is a larger particle, whereas the 2.5 particle matter is a smaller particle and should be the particle that's monitored, because those are the particles that gets lodged into your lungs more easily. It just gives you a comparison of the different readings and descriptions given by the US Embassy that reads 2.5 particle matter in relation to the particle matter 10 reading by the Chinese Environmental Ministry of Protection. However, I should say that due to some weiboing from the Chinese population and some pressures, the 2.5 reading has been online for the Chinese population. They do give a range in hourly readings of different sections of Beijing, but not the overall average of the city per day. And they also don't have any descriptions that describe the number of readings. I heard that would start in 2016. So this is an example of September 2010. They're again in grids based on grids on months, full months that I'm in Beijing. And you can see the different coloration patterns. And this is also the text that corresponds to it. The text, basically anything that's 100 and below, according to the Chinese Environmental Ministry of Protection, is considered a blue sky day. Anything above 100, obviously, is not any kind of descriptive markers. So you can see from their descriptions, blue sky days are pretty plentiful. Now, it's fascinating because you see these colors and you think, oh wow, they're so beautiful, and they could be seen as so beautiful as well. But one thing I noticed, looking at the colors, is these mixtures of reds and yellows into the blues, where it would become like a cerulean blue, and what that meant. So I'm much more sensitive to the color to be able to gauge a particular reading by just looking at the color of the sky at this point. This is February. This is March. These are single panels. And the grid patterns are 50 by 80 inches. These are 11 months that were recorded. There were a total of 12 months recorded. And yes, there were some days where they were very dark, so they ended up becoming dark. This was exhibited at the Liaoding Design Center in Beijing. And I was able to realize this installation format at the Chinese Millennium Monument Museum of Digital Arts. In the installation format, what I did was correspond sound and color and text all together in the experience, which was quite, it was a nice challenge. I was very happy to be able to just dive right into this and see what we could do to bring this color experience to the audience. And so the sound was a white noise. It was a distinctive white noise. And white noise has a particular formula to it. There's red, there's brown, there's all these different colors that describe noise from what I've learned. But the white noise, the volume level of white noise would increase and decrease based on the air pollution index. And so if you saw like 473 heavily polluted, the noise would be incredibly loud and blaring, kind of like in a lot of concerts. I'm sure the the guys weren't so happy being by that all the time. The Blue Sky Day, 81 good, but not as loud. Oh yeah. I guess we can't go back. I guess we can. Okay, so essentially this was translated in installation format. And again, a wall was built as for a wall, and you could just envelop yourself in the coloration. And there were days too where the actual reading didn't seem to correspond to the color at all. Like some gray sky days were actually clear, but you know, you would be expecting it to be of a high API, and it wasn't. Some blue sky days that looked blue or a mixture of blue were actually high in pollution levels. One of the first small little discovery projects was Quarantined. This was published in Art and Architecture magazine earlier, was this process, this idea, this perception of disease containment, and how in the States it's rendered differently, it's exercised differently than in Asia. I was talking to the editor of the magazine. I said, well, why do you want to publish it? Well, we were talking about the project just in general, and I said, well, what do you think of it? She's like, well, this seems pretty normal. You know, it's like, I don't understand why you're documenting it. I mean, that's just how it's done. You know, we contain people if they're sick, and that's that. So it's like, it's almost like, again, and I think it has to do with that collective mindset. And there are different measures that are taken and people accept it, and that's perfectly fine too. Whereas in the States, not as much, no like temperature monitoring to the heads as you come into the airport. And if you were to contain people for a week, I'm sure there would be issues of, you know, we have our rights, you can't do that type of a situation that might come up. And so it really talks about different ways, cultural ways of containing diseases. This was done because my husband actually was sitting 3 seats away from a person that was infected with H2N1. And so I was just fascinated with the process of being this containment process and documenting it. And so what he did is he documented everything from his iPhone, and I documented everything from Skype. And we did a little collage. So these are some of the close-ups. Check-in point, his bed, which side of the bed he was sitting on today, yesterday. Temperature readings, he had to wear his mask when he left the room. What he ate, the semiotics of the place we encountered in the elevators. And that's quarantined. This one was actually published in Vision magazine. It was a story called Mixed Blood, and it was something that it was a topic I wanted to kind of continue from Kilpil, because I learned about this issue from Kilpil and encountered people that were of mixed race. And so instead of putting an abstract background, what this family collection does is it contextualizes themselves in their home environments, and you're able to see this relational dynamic between the individuals. They were placed in a particular structural way with a hierarchical setting where the father is furthest to the left, the mother, and the children. The reason why I wanted to do this for 9 families in New York is this was part of my reality, living in New York City for over 12 years, and some people thought that it was kind of different, but to me that wasn't different. That was my normal. So, and a lot of my friends happen to have children that were mixed blood. So these individuals were given similar sets of questions of defining themselves and being American, and how they were able to also talk about how they integrated their ancestries into their everyday lives, some of their family traditions and practices. But what's interesting is that when you look at the history of mixed blood, especially in America, you can see it coming from a binary perspective where it's, you know, full white to full African American and the mixing of the two. And you know, from there you've had terms like miscegenation and so forth, and maybe not so positive, or categorization, or US censuses and so forth. But doing this project at this point in time, it's showing a different type of understanding of this mixed blood community, per se. These individuals, these parents, a lot of them are mixed themselves, and they're having mixed children, and so, and there's not so much stigma, especially since they live in New York City. And there's this sense of pride to many of the families, like we're so lucky to be mixed because we get to experience more cultures than you do type situation with the children. So, it's a different perspective, and it's really astounding to see how it's evolved, especially in America. So I'm just going to read off a few quotes, and I just typed in just the ancestry and the languages that the following authors spoke, so you can get a better understanding of the amount of cultures that these individuals have. With Rebecca Levin, she says, Rebecca Levin's mother, she says, globally minded, multicultural, multinational seeds are home for anyone who shares my values of decency, fairness, inclusion, sharing, unselfishness, community contribution, healthy and environmentally conscious living is at home in my home. I see mostly advantages, but the blurring of cultures may lead to less specificity among cultures and changing of traditions for people to follow. But hopefully this will lead to a more peaceful, harmonious society. Mixed blood too. Ryan Collins, who's a father, says, my father was in the military and moved from the U.S. to Puerto Rico multiple times. I grew up with mixed kids and felt like a proud American. In a lot of respects, I feel really blessed in the way that I grew up because race and color didn't make a difference. Being in a military family, you all have to count on each other, black or white, at least with the way that I grew up. They didn't want you to concentrate on the differences, but the similar fact that you were American. Mixed blood number 3, these two parents actually grew up in Hawaii. So Matthew James, the father, says, my father, with Irish, English, and German blood, never felt like a mixed child, and most people today would see him as a white American. However, my grandfather said that back then, having both Irish and German blood in a person was definitely considered a mixed race. Determining an individual as mixed really has to do with whatever the generations or cultural barriers at the moment are, and they're always changing. I'm sure that Helena, my daughter, will look back when she's older and see her mixture as part of the norm. They are the new world people. Next blood 4, Joanne Raw. The future America will be hopefully more aware and open, but Jonas and I doubt things will change drastically. More open and aware so that people become the more close to extremes others become. Mixed blood 5. Stefan Walter. He's an eccentric. He says, although we're in the U.S., I only speak German to Salome, my daughter. I'm trying to infuse in her multiple thinking structure, categorical thinking, and machine-like behavior. She's a container kid. We open the lid of the container and throw in some French and German. In Cayenne, my life is throwing in some other things. We'll see what happens. Next blood number 6. J.E. Park, the mother, says, we bring our flair and creativity and diverse experiences from our Italian and Korean cultures, but we are also proud that we are part of the American society. We belong here. It is our home. Blood number 7, Aki Baker, the Japanese mother. In the U.S., sometimes doing group activities is difficult. Americans are brought up to be very individualistic with their intellectual properties and set of ideas. In Japan, your ideas get submerged within the group, and sometimes it loses its original form or a new one is created. It may be stifling because the group may not value your exact idea, but the group takes its own shape and collaborates harmoniously together to get things done. This behavior tends to come from honor, responsibility, and also it can come from shame or guilt. I want my children to be able to fully understand the differences from my upbringing in the American culture. Just talking and taking part in festivals doesn't make you understand the culture. Tomasa Doyle, the mother. I have a different view on Americanism. I've always felt that I've related to be rooted in life and culture. Although I love my country, physically I've been drawn to places outside of the U.S. I feel like the U.S. is a little more judgmental, where things are categorized in a box. Maybe it's because I'm a Black American woman. And then on the other hand, you have Jean Choi, who says, America is possibilities and national crash, although I'm sure there will be more resistance ahead as the world continues to rapidly change. America is becoming more accepting as global influences continue to bombard us. The culture seems so different, even from when I was a young adult. So that was the Mixed Project. I'm continuing this series of drawing other families in China as we speak. So it will be interesting to kind of compare and contrast that. Moving Moments was actually a commission, and it was a project that brought attention to the Dashala area. And this was intriguing to me. I'll just skip over this. Let's read it. But anyways, it's a project that talks about the Hutong, and I mentioned Dashala earlier, of over 600 years of history. It used to be an old commercial Hutong, a well-functioning, a highly respected Hutong area that contained the best of Chinese-made products. So if you visited Beijing, you would go there and you would buy great Chinese medicine, great Chinese fabrics, great homegrown brands, handmade fabric shoes. So it was something that had gone through a lot of transformation, obviously with the Cultural Revolution, with the earthquake of 1976, which created a lot of destruction, and also changed the infrastructure and forced other families to join other homes, and so there's constant thinking about how this Hutong can be better improved. So basically, I was asked to be able to talk about the personality of this place, and it allowed me to really understand Hutong living. And I don't know if everyone knows what Hutong is, but it's an old traditional Chinese community that has courtyard houses embedded in old alleyways. And they are very vibrant with life and community, and have exercised that kind of life even more so in the past. So in order to be able to characterize this place, I ended up profiling 10 individuals that had a relationship with Dashala, either worked there or lived there, and 10 individuals, 10 facades of the area, both in the day and the night, because the day and the night personalities of these facades have very different characteristics. And so the individuals were projected in a still and moving type of composite, where it was projected onto the screen. I'm just going to go through this and show the layout so I can get a better sense of the placement. I'll go back to this later. I don't know why that's crooked, but it's actually supposed to be straight. It was projected onto the screen, and the still on the left was there for the viewer to be able to reference the profile, and the moving image on the right contrasted that, where I was allowed to bring the text, their personal stories, and have that take precedence over the actual imagery. And it just allowed the people to focus on the movement. And this kind of structure was repeated with the facades as well, the daytime on the left and the nighttime on the right. And unfortunately, I don't have moving image examples to show you, but what I can say is that with the still, your eye tends to go to could be a particular sign, it could be a subject matter, it could be a gaze, it could be something that's dominant in the picture, but with the moving, you're really able to understand the vibrance and the personality of the background and the people and how they engage with the facade. And that was the reason why this was done in this way, to compare and contrast that. And it was interesting because sometimes, like in the nighttime, you would see the still and moving look very similar, but at the same time quite different because the lighting would actually change in these pieces. And there would be maybe a flickering of something, flickering of like the wind moving signage or the room or these kind of things. So that's one thing. Sunrise is another piece I did. It was actually this interest of this iconic image more from an aesthetic point of view and less from a political point of view. An image that has been the most produced image in the world. Yeah, and I'll finish up with this. So and basically it has to do with the aesthetics of this image. I had the good fortune of meeting the retoucher who retouched his photographs. This is a painting version. And asking him questions about just his usage of light and coloration, highlights in the eyes and so forth. There are different questions that I had concerning, because you can see the light source is coming in from one end, but then the highlights are shining from another. He also said that the background represented the horizon, which was to symbolize a new dawn, a new China. And he also said that when you look at the image in Tiananmen from any angle, it looks like as if he's looking at you, which is quite intriguing. It does look like he's looking at me from this angle as well. So what I did is I took this sunrise aspect that I was intrigued by, the symbolic placement of color, and I varied the color densities of the actual background to resemble different ages. Like at 55, he brought China together as one country, and you can see that in this. It's the most dense in coloration. At 1, it's just barely there. At 40, it's getting more saturated. 70, and then there's a kind of group collection.